Bound by ropes, 3 Apache sisters knelt in the dust as bandits circled, their laughter cruel under the burning sun. Then came the gunshot, a cowboy stepping from the ridge, revolver steady, eyes cold as steel. In that moment, fate shifted. And when the dust settled, one sister spoke words no one expected. "I and my sisters are yours now." The desert was merciless that day, its heat pressing like a hand on the earth. A small wagon lay overturned in the sand, its wheels shattered, its contents scattered. Nearby, 3 Apache sisters had been dragged to the ground, their wrists bound, their faces marked with dust and fear. The bandits who had captured them laughed loud and ugly, boasting of the price their captives would fetch. They weren't just raiders, they were scavengers of human lives, men who thrived on cruelty. One, broad-shouldered with a scar running across his mouth, leaned close to the eldest sister, whispering words that made her flinch but never bow her head. Then a sound cracked across the canyon, the unmistakable echo of a rifle shot. The bandits froze, their laughter cut short. From the ridge above, a lone cowboy appeared, his figure outlined against the burning sky. His revolver glinted in the sun, his stance calm yet coiled, like a predator waiting for the first move. "Step away from them," his voice rang clear. The bandits cursed, spitting into the dust, but their hands wavered. They hadn't expected trouble, not here, not now, and certainly not from one man who stood as though he carried an army behind him. The sister's eyes turned upward, a flicker of hope breaking through their terror. The youngest clutched her sister's arm, whispering, "Is he here for us?" But the eldest said nothing, her gaze locked on the stranger who had defied death itself to stand against their captors. What followed was not a long fight, but a brutal one. Gunfire cracked, dust rising as bullets split the silence. The cowboy moved with a deadly precision that left no room for chance. When the smoke cleared, the bandits lay broken in the sand, their cruelty silenced. The cowboy holstered his weapon slowly, stepping toward the sisters. His eyes, sharp yet not unkind, met theirs. He reached for his knife, cutting their bonds one by one. The eldest rubbed her wrists, raw from rope, and looked up at him with a steadiness that surprised even herself. Her voice trembled, but her words carried the weight of choice. "I and my sisters are yours now," she said, and in that moment, the desert bore witness to a vow that would change all of their lives. The silence that followed the gunfight was heavier than the smoke that lingered in the air. The desert, moments before alive with the crack of bullets and the shouts of dying men, now returned to its stillness. The whisper of wind across stone, the distant cry of a hawk. The cowboy stood with his revolver still loose in his hand, eyes scanning the bodies sprawled across the sand. He moved slowly, boots crunching in the dust, giving each bandit a final glance to be sure none would rise again. Only when he was satisfied did he holster his weapon. The sisters hadn't moved. They knelt together, wrists raw and red where the ropes had bitten deep. Dust streaked their faces, but their eyes remained clear. When the cowboy crouched to cut the last bonds, the eldest sister's words rang out, words that seemed to hang in the hot air like thunder. "I and my sisters are yours now." The cowboy paused, his knife hovering. His eyes lifted, meeting hers. They were dark eyes, steady, unflinching, though her voice had trembled. The youngest sister gasped softly, clutching at her sibling's arm, as if afraid of what the words meant. The cowboy cut the final rope and stood, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "I don't own you," he said quietly. The eldest rose slowly, rubbing her wrists. Her back was straight, despite the bruises, her chin high, despite the danger that had nearly claimed them. "You saved us," she said. "In our way, that makes you our protector, and if you protect, then we follow." He studied her a long moment, then looked at the other two. The middle sister avoided his gaze, her eyes cast down, but the youngest, barely more than a girl, looked at him with something like awe. "What's your name?" he asked at last. The eldest answered, "Nahila. These are my sisters, Sani and Taya." He nodded once. Colt Maddox. They gathered near the overturned wagon, salvaging what they could. Most of the supplies had been stolen or smashed by the bandits, but a few blankets, a canteen, and a small bundle of herbs remained. Nahila moved with quiet efficiency, tending to her sister's wrists with the herbs, her hands steady even as Sani flinched. Colt leaned against a rock, reloading his revolver with slow, deliberate motions. His eyes flicked to them now and then, though he said little. Finally, Taya broke the silence, her voice soft but insistent. "You were like thunder," she whispered, staring at him. "They fell before you could even blink." Colt's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Luck and a steady hand." Nahila glanced at him, her tone sharper. "Not luck, skill, and skill is not given freely. You fought for us when no one else would." He shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Didn't do it for thanks." "Then why?" she pressed. Colt looked away, the horizon burning under the sinking sun. "Because no one deserves to be left in ropes." They made camp in the shadow of a bluff, the air cooling as night crept in. Colt built a small fire, his movements precise, efficient. The sisters huddled near the flames, their silence broken only by the crackle of wood. When the meat Colt had hunted earlier sizzled over the fire, Sani finally spoke, her voice low. "We should not trust him." Taya frowned. "He saved us." Sani shook her head. "Men save only to claim." "Did you not hear Nahila's words? We are his now." Nahila's gaze snapped to her sister, firm. "No, I spoke them. I gave us." "That is different." Colt's head lifted slightly, catching the exchange. His voice was calm but carried steel. "You're free. Whatever words were spoken, I don't bind you. Tomorrow, you walk whichever path you choose." The fire popped, throwing sparks into the night. Nahila held his gaze, her eyes unreadable. "And if we choose to walk with you?" Colt looked at her a long moment, then returned his attention to the fire. "Then you better be ready. The desert doesn't spare anyone, not even me." Later, when the sisters slept close together beneath the blankets, Nahila stayed awake. She sat near the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on Colt, where he sat, sharpening his knife. "You think us foolish?" she said quietly. Colt didn't look up. "I think you've been through hell." She studied his face, the lines cut deep by sun and battle. "Why do you walk alone?" His hand stilled on the blade, but he didn't answer at once. Finally, he said, "Because walking with me tends to get people killed." Nahila's voice was firm. "Yet tonight you kept us alive." For a moment, the desert was silent, save for the wind. Then Colt sheathed his knife, his eyes meeting hers in the flicker of firelight. "Don't mistake tonight for promise." Nahila didn't flinch. "Then let us see what tomorrow brings." The firelight danced between them, casting long shadows on the canyon walls. Neither moved, neither spoke again. But in the stillness, something had begun, a thread drawn taut, fragile yet unbreakable. The morning came sharp and cold, the desert air biting at their skin, even as the sun promised another scorching day ahead. Colt rose first, his movements quiet, practiced, every gesture honed from years of waking in dangerous places. He saddled his horse, checked the chamber of his revolver, and only then did he glance at the sisters, still huddled beneath the blankets. Nahila was already awake. She sat upright, her hair loose over her shoulders, watching him without a word. When their eyes met, she inclined her head slightly, not as thanks, but as acknowledgement. He returned the gesture, silent understanding passing between them. Sani stirred next, her expression guarded as she noticed Colt by the fire. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, muttering, "We should not ride with him." Nahila's voice was steady, low enough that only her sisters heard. "He saved us. That binds us. For now." Sani's eyes flashed. "Or it binds us forever. You gave him our names. You gave him our loyalty." Before Nahila could answer, Taya broke in softly, her voice laced with stubborn hope. "Maybe loyalty is not always a chain. Maybe it can be a choice." Nahila looked at her youngest sister, then back to Sani. "It is a choice, mine, and I will carry the weight of it." By mid-morning, they were on the trail, the sun climbing higher, burning away the chill. Colt rode slightly ahead, scanning the horizon with eyes that missed little. The sisters followed close, Nahila steady in her saddle, Sani tense, Taya watching everything with wide-eyed curiosity. The desert stretched endless, the horizon rippling with heat. To the untrained, it seemed empty, but Colt's gaze caught details, faint tracks in the sand, a vulture circling overhead, a shimmer where smoke might rise. "You see something," Nahila said, guiding her horse closer. Colt kept his eyes forward. Tracks, not fresh, but not old either. "Could be riders passed through yesterday." Sani stiffened. "Bandits?" "Maybe," Colt replied. "Maybe just traders. Out here. Hard to tell one from the other." Nahila studied him, her voice calm. "Then we stay sharp." He gave a faint smile, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You've got a soldier's head on you. She lifted her chin. Not soldier, survivor. At noon, they stopped by a cluster of rocks for shade. Colt unsaddled his horse, letting it graze, while Nahila divided what little food they carried. A few strips of dried meat, a handful of hard bread. She gave the largest portion to Sani, who scowled but accepted it without thanks. "You feed us before yourself," Colt observed quietly. Nahila shrugged. "That is what leaders do." He studied her a long moment, then nodded. "Then you'll do fine." Taya smiled faintly, encouraged, but Sani's bitterness flared. "She leads us into chains," she muttered. "You cannot see it, but I do. Men do not fight for free. One day he will take his price." Colt's voice cut sharp. "I don't take what isn't given." Sani met his gaze, unflinching. "All men say the same." For a moment the air crackled, tension heavy as the sun overhead. Nahila stepped between them, her voice firm. "Enough. We walk this path together, or not at all. If mistrust consumes us, the desert will finish what the bandits began." Her words silenced them, though the resentment in Sani's eyes remained. That night, they camped near a dry riverbed. The firelight flickered across their faces, shadows stretching long against the sand. Colt sat slightly apart, cleaning his revolver, while the sisters spoke in low tones. Taya asked softly, "Do you think he will leave us?" Nahila shook her head. "No. He has the look of a man who walks forward even when the path is fire." Sani crossed her arms. "Or a man who drags others into fire with him." Nahila's patience frayed, but her voice stayed calm. "He did not drag us. We chose to follow." Sani turned sharply. "No, you chose, and we are bound to it." The fire crackled, the silence sharp. Finally, Nahila looked toward Colt, who had not turned but whose posture told her he heard every word. "He hears us," she said. Sani's mouth twisted. "Then let him know where I stand." Later, when her sisters slept, Nahila rose and moved to where Colt sat beneath the stars. He didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on the dark horizon. "You carry their doubt," he said quietly. "I carry their lives," she answered. He finally turned his head, meeting her gaze. "That's a heavy burden for someone so young." Her voice was steady. "Better my shoulders than theirs." For a moment he studied her, then nodded. "You've got iron in you, don't let anyone take it." She tilted her head. "And what about you? What do you carry?" His eyes darkened. "More than I should." The silence stretched, filled with things unsaid. Nahila didn't press further. She only sat beside him, both of them staring out at the desert as if it might answer. Before dawn, a distant howl broke the silence. Not wolf, not coyote. Men. The sisters stirred, fear flashing in their eyes. Colt was already on his feet, revolver in hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Riders," he muttered, "coming fast." Nahila's hand tightened on her knife. Sani clutched Taya's arm. The desert that had seemed endless and empty now felt alive with threat. Their fragile alliance was about to be tested. The pre-dawn sky was bruised purple, streaked with the first pale hints of light. The howl echoed again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable rhythm of hooves pounding across hard earth. Dust plumes rose on the horizon, riders, a dozen or more, sweeping toward the riverbed. Colt crouched low, revolver in hand, eyes narrowing as he counted shadows. "Too many to meet head-on," he muttered. Nahila's knife flashed as she tightened her grip. "Then we move. Now." Sani's voice cracked. "Move where? The desert will swallow us. They will catch us before midday." Colt looked back at the sisters, his face carved in steel. "She's right. We can't outrun a mounted pack, but we can use the land." Nahila's brow furrowed. "How?" He pointed to the ridge of rocks above the riverbed. "Narrow pass up there. If we get there first, their numbers won't matter. They'll have to come at us, one by one." Taya swallowed hard. "And if they surround us?" Colt's voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "Then we fight until we can't." The decision had to be made quickly. Nahila swung onto her horse, eyes sharp. "We ride for the pass." Sani hesitated, clutching Taya's hand. "No, we should give them what they want. Supplies, horses, even—" Her voice faltered, but her meaning was clear. Nahila's fury snapped. "Would you offer your sister as payment?" Sani's jaw clenched. "I would offer anything to live." Colt's eyes darkened, his voice cutting through their argument. "Enough. There's no bargain they'll honor. Once you're in their hands, you don't walk away." Sani glared at him, but she mounted her horse with trembling hands. Nahila pulled Taya up behind her, and together they spurred forward, the thunder of hooves closing fast behind. The climb toward the ridge was steep, the path narrow and treacherous. Horses scrambled over loose rock, their flanks slick with sweat. Behind them, the riders' shouts grew louder, rifles cracking in the dawn. Bullets sparked against stone, sending shards flying. Colt twisted in his saddle, firing a shot that clipped one pursuer, sending him crashing from his horse. "Keep moving," he barked. Nahila pressed forward, teeth clenched, every muscle burning. Taya clung to her waist, whispering prayers into the wind. Sani lagged slightly behind, her face pale with terror, but the fire in Nahila's eyes pulled her onward. At last they reached the choke point, a narrow slit of rock where the path funneled tight. Colt dismounted, revolver ready, pulling the sisters' horses behind the cover of stone. "Here we make our stand," he said. The first riders appeared moments later, their silhouettes black against the rising sun. They slowed, seeing the bottleneck, but the leader, a broad man with a red scarf tied around his neck, spurred forward, shouting for blood. Colt fired once, the shot echoing like thunder. The leader fell, horse screaming as it reared. Chaos rippled through the pack, but more pressed forward, fury in their eyes. Nahila crouched low behind a boulder, knife ready. "You cannot face them all." Colt's jaw tightened. "I don't have to. I just have to make them bleed enough to think twice." Sani's voice rose, sharp with panic. "This is madness. We'll all die here." Nahila snapped at her, voice fierce. "Then die standing." Taya's small hands trembled as she gripped the dagger Colt had given her earlier. Her eyes were wide, but she whispered, "I'm not afraid." Colt glanced at her, something flickering in his eyes. "Good. Fear's what kills fastest." The riders surged again, gunfire rattling the rocks. Colt fired back, his shots precise, each one buying them another breath. Nahila darted forward in the confusion, slashing at a rider who tried to force his horse through the pass. Blood sprayed, the man tumbling into the dust. Sani froze, horror rooting her to the ground. She watched her sister fight like a storm, her knife flashing, her eyes fierce. In that moment, her fear cracked, replaced by something harder, shame. One rider managed to push closer, his rifle aimed straight at Colt, but Taya, trembling yet unflinching, hurled her dagger. It struck the man's arm, knocking his shot wide. Colt didn't waste the chance. He dropped him with a single round. He looked back at the youngest sister, a rare flicker of pride in his voice. "Good throw!" The battle stretched on, brutal and relentless. Colt's revolver emptied, smoke rising from the barrel. He ducked to reload, wincing as a bullet grazed his arm. Nahila covered him, her knife sinking into another attacker before he could close the distance. At last, the riders faltered. Their numbers had thinned, the path choked with fallen men and horses. The survivors pulled back, their leader shouting for retreat. Within moments, the sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the stench of blood. Nahila collapsed against the rocks, chest heaving, knife slick with crimson. Taya leaned against her, trembling but alive. Sani stood rigid, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Colt holstered his revolver, his face grim. "They'll be back. Men like that don't forgive a wound. But we bought time." Nahila wiped her blade, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Time is all we need." Sani finally found her voice, raw and quiet. "I doubted. And you fought. Both of you." She swallowed hard, shame in her eyes. "Perhaps I was wrong." Nahila placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. "Fear does not make you weak. Staying in fear does. Now you've seen what standing means." Colt glanced at them, then toward the horizon where the riders had vanished. His jaw was set, his eyes distant. "They'll bring more. They always do." The sisters followed his gaze. The desert stretched vast and empty, but somewhere out there danger was already gathering again. The village lay low against the horizon, a scatter of adobe huts and wooden shacks clinging to the edge of the desert. Smoke curled from cook fires, and children ran barefoot across the dusty street. For a moment it looked almost peaceful, too peaceful for those who had ridden through blood and fire the night before. Colt reined in his horse at the outskirts, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the town. "Border place," he muttered. "Traders, drifters, outlaws. Don't expect a welcome." Nahila rode beside him, her sisters close behind. "We need water, shelter. They'll give it if we pay." Sani's voice was sharp. "And if they don't? What then?" "You trust too much." Nahila's reply was steady, firm. I trust the land provides when it must. They rode in. The street quieted as villagers noticed the strangers. Men leaned in doorways, women pulled children aside, and every eye fixed on the Apache girls and the bloodied cowboy who rode with them. They dismounted by the well at the center. Colt filled the canteens, his posture calm but wary. Nahila knelt to help Taya wash the dust from her face, while Sani kept her eyes on the crowd, her unease clear. A voice rang out from the saloon porch. "Well, now, ain't every day we see Apaches strolling in with a white gunman at their side." The speaker was tall, lean, with a narrow face and a pistol strapped loose at his hip. A half-dozen men lounged behind him, all with the same look of men who'd rather spill blood than sweat for coin. Colt didn't rise to the bait. He capped the canteen and said evenly, "We're here for supplies, that's all." The man smirked. "Supplies cost more when you don't belong." His gaze slid to Nahila and her sisters, lingering too long. "Especially when you bring prizes." Nahila stiffened, her hand brushing the knife at her waist. "We are not prizes." Laughter rippled from the porch. Colt straightened, his voice low but hard. "Leave it." The smirk faltered, just slightly, under the weight of his tone. "But pride is a dangerous fuel." The man tipped his hat mockingly. "Careful, stranger. Folks around here don't like outsiders giving orders." "Good thing I'm not asking," Colt replied. For a long beat, silence stretched. Then the man spat into the dust, muttered something to his companions, and they drifted back inside the saloon. The tension lingered, though the villagers' stares didn't soften. Nahila felt the weight of them, like stones pressing against her chest. They found lodging in a small hut at the edge of town, traded for with the few silver coins Colt carried. Inside, the air was close, the walls cracked, but it was shelter. Sani paced like a caged animal. "You see, they hate us. They will sell us the moment they see profit." Nahila's tone was sharp. "Enough, Sani. Fear has spoken in every word you've given since we left the riverbed." Her sister's eyes flashed. "Fear keeps us alive." "No," Nahila countered. "Strength does." The argument died only when Colt spoke from the corner, where he sat cleaning his revolver. "She's right. Fear makes you hesitate, and hesitation gets you killed." Sani glared at him. "Easy for you to say. You carry a gun. We carry nothing but skin they want to sell." Nahila stepped between them, her eyes blazing. "Not nothing. We carry each other. That is more than you think." Later, as night fell, the village grew restless. Drunken laughter spilled from the saloon, boots thudded against wooden floors, and the air filled with the sour tang of whiskey. From the hut's small window, Nahila watched shadows gathering, men lingering too long, watching their door. "They will come," she whispered. Colt buckled his gun belt, his voice steady. "Then we don't wait for them inside." Nahila's eyes widened, but she understood. Hiding would only make them prey. She nodded, drawing her knife. "We meet them in the open." Sani shook her head in disbelief. "You're both mad. There are too many." Taya, quieter but braver than before, spoke up. "If we hide, they take us anyway. If we fight, at least we choose." Sani stared at her youngest sister, words failing her. The saloon doors burst open, lantern lights spilling across the street. The lean man from earlier stepped out with his companions, their guns loose at their sides. He called out, his voice oily and mocking. "Come on out, strangers. No need to be shy, we just want to talk." Colt pushed open the hut door, stepping into the street. Nahila flanked him, knife in hand, her sisters behind. The man grinned. "There now. Was that so hard?" His eyes slid to the girls. "We'll take the Apaches off your hands, cowboy. You can keep walking." Colt's hand hovered near his revolver. Not happening. The grin faded. "Then you're a fool." The air snapped taut, the village holding its breath as the first hand twitched toward steel. The fight was short, brutal. Colt's revolver cracked twice, dropping two men before they cleared leather. Nahila moved like lightning, her knife flashing in the lamplight as she cut another down. Taya threw a rock with surprising force, striking one man's temple and sending him sprawling. The lean man cursed, firing wild. His bullet grazed Colt's hat, tearing it from his head. Colt's return shot struck the gun from his hand, leaving him clutching his bleeding wrist. Silence followed, the villagers staring from doorways. The gang scrambled, dragging their wounded leader back toward the saloon, their bravado shattered. Nahila stood panting, her knife slick with blood. Colt holstered his revolver, his jaw tight. Around them, the village was silent, fear and awe mingling in every watching eye. Sani whispered, her voice trembling. We cannot stay here. They will return. Colt nodded. She's right. We ride at first light. Nahila sheathed her blade, her face set. Then at first light we ride together. The first light of dawn bled across the desert, pale and cold. The village still slept, its streets quiet, though the silence felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Inside the hut, Colt buckled his gun belt with practiced motions. His face was set, calm but taut. We move now, he said. Nahila nodded, already tying a bundle of supplies. Her sisters stirred behind her, Sani's expression grim, Taya rubbing sleep from her eyes. They will follow, Sani whispered. They already follow, Colt replied. The only question is whether we leave them behind or not. They mounted quickly, the horses restless, as if sensing what lay ahead. Colt led them through the quiet streets, boots of his gelding striking sharp against stone. Villagers watched from behind shuttered windows, whispers following the strangers as they passed. At the edge of town, Nahila glanced back. Figures moved in the shadows near the saloon, rifles slung across shoulders. The lean man from the night before clutched his bandaged wrist, his face twisted in rage. His voice carried faint across the dawn air. Ride. Then. We'll hunt you down. Nahila's jaw tightened. She turned back, her voice steady. They will come. Colt didn't look over his shoulder. Let them. The desert's on our side. By midday, the sun burned merciless overhead. They rode hard, the horses lathered with sweat, every hoofbeat echoing the urgency in their chests. Dust rose behind them, a faint trail marking their passage. Nahila urged her sisters onward, keeping them close. Stay tight. Do not lag, Taya nodded, determination flickering in her young eyes. Sani muttered under her breath but obeyed, though her fear was plain. Colt scouted ahead, his gaze sharp on the horizon. At one point, he raised a hand, halting them. He dismounted, crouching low to study the sand. They're trailing us, he said. 6 riders, maybe more, half a day behind. Sani's face paled. We cannot keep this pace. The horses, they'll hold, Colt cut in. But we need ground they can't take easy. Nahila looked north, where jagged cliffs rose in the distance. The canyons. Colt nodded. That'll do. They pressed on, the land growing harsher, the rocks sharper under hoof. By late afternoon, the first canyon walls rose around them, sheer cliffs of red stone that glowed under the sinking sun. Shadows deepened, the air cooling. But shadows also carried echoes. The faint sound of riders behind them drifted through the canyon like a warning. They're closer, Nahila said, her hand tightening on her knife. Colt's eyes narrowed. Too close. We make our stand here. Sani gasped. No, we cannot fight again. Not so soon. Nahila turned on her, eyes blazing. Then would you rather they take us bound? Would you rather chains? Taya's small voice rose, trembling but fierce. No chains. Not ever again. Her words silenced even Sani. They found a narrow bend in the canyon, where the walls pressed close. Colt positioned the horses behind rocks, then took cover near the mouth, revolver steady in his grip. Stay low, he told the sisters. Only strike when they're close. The first riders appeared moments later, their shouts echoing. The lean man led them, rage burning in his eyes. There they are! Kill the cowboy, take the girls alive. Gunfire split the canyon. Colt's revolver barked, dropping one man before he cleared the bend. Nahila darted forward, her knife slashing the leg of another who tried to ride through. Blood spattered, the man falling with a cry. Sani froze, trembling, until Taya shoved a stone into her hand. Throw! The youngest shouted. Sani hurled it with surprising force, striking a rider's face and knocking him back. Shock flared in her eyes, her first act not of fear but of defiance. The canyon roared with chaos. Horses screamed, dust choked the air. Colt fought with precision, every shot buying them moments. Nahila moved like lightning, her blade flashing, her cries fierce. Even Taya, small and slight, fought with desperation, clawing at any man who came too close. The lean man pushed through the chaos, his pistol aimed square at Colt. This time you die, Maddox. Colt turned to me, but his revolver clicked empty. For a breath, death loomed, until Nahila sprang, slamming into the outlaw, her knife sliced across his cheek, blood spraying. He howled, firing wild, the shot ricocheting off stone. Colt seized the chance, swinging his fist. The outlaw fell hard, his pistol clattering into the dust. The remaining riders faltered, fear creeping into their eyes. One shouted for retreat, and within moments, The canyon fell silent but for the groans of the wounded and the ragged breaths of the survivors. The dust settled. Nahila stood panting, her blade dripping crimson. Colt reloaded slowly, his hand shaking just slightly. Taya clung to her sister's waist, trembling but alive. Sani sank to her knees, her face pale but her eyes wide with something new. Respect. Colt holstered his revolver, his voice low. They'll think twice before coming again, but they will come. Nahila wiped her blade on the dirt, her chest heaving. Then we keep moving. Together. He met her gaze, and for the first time, the faintest smile ghosted across his lips. Together, then. That night they camped beneath the canyon walls, the stars sharp above them. The fire burned small, shadows flickering across tired faces. Sani sat quietly, no longer filled with bitter words. Taya leaned against Nahila, her eyes already closing. Colt sat apart, his revolver across his lap. Nahila joined him, sitting close but silent for a while. Finally, she said softly, "You fight as if you have nothing left to lose." His eyes stayed on the flames. "Maybe I don't. Not until now." Her chest tightened, but she didn't press further. Instead, she whispered, "Then hold on. We are not done yet." The desert stretched ahead, endless and uncertain. But for the first time, the path felt less like exile and more like destiny. The mission appeared at dusk, its whitewashed walls glowing faint in the last light of day. A small bell tower rose above the adobe compound, the cross at its peak silhouetted against the dying sun. Beyond its walls, the desert stretched empty, but within, voices murmured, and the smell of wood smoke promised warmth. Colt reined in his horse at the gate. His posture was steady, but Nahila noticed the tension in his jaw. "Mission folk don't ask questions," he muttered, "but they don't give without judging, either." Nahila glanced at her sisters. Taya's eyes shone with hope, but Sani's remained wary, her lips pressed tight. At the gate, a friar appeared, an older man with a lined face and kind, cautious eyes. His robes were dust-stained, his hands calloused from more than prayer. He raised a lantern, studying the strangers. "You've come far," he said, "and you carry the desert with you." Colt inclined his head. "We need water, shelter, just for the night." The friar's gaze lingered on Nahila and her sisters, then returned to Colt. Something in his eyes sharpened. "And you, I know your face." Colt's jaw tightened. "You don't." The friar said nothing more, only stepped aside and opened the gate. "Enter. God's house does not refuse the weary." Inside, the courtyard smelled of herbs and smoke. A handful of children watched shyly as the sisters dismounted, their small hands clutching rosaries. Women carried water jugs, their glances curious but wary. Nahila helped Taya wash at the well, while Sani muttered, "They look at us like we are ghosts. They look at us like we are different." Nahila replied calmly, "We have always been different." Meanwhile, Colt spoke quietly with the friar, his voice low. Nahila caught fragments: soldier, fire, sins. She saw Colt's shoulders stiffen, saw the friar's expression grow heavy with recognition. Later, over a meager meal of beans and bread, the friar sat across from them. His gaze fell on Colt. Once, years ago, a detachment rode through this desert. They burned villages, left the land black. "You were with them." The words fell like stones. Sani's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with vindication. "I knew it," she hissed. "He is no savior. He is death." Nahila's breath caught, her gaze shifting to Colt. She had heard hints of his past, but not spoken so plainly. Colt's eyes met the friar's without flinching. "I was there," he admitted, "and I've carried it ever since." The friar's face was grave, and still, "You walk free." Colt's voice was low, rough. "Free? I've never been free." The room fell silent. Taya's small voice broke it, trembling but strong. "He saved us." Sani rounded on her. "He destroyed others. Do you not see? We sit beside the same fire as the man who burned our kin." Nahila's chest tightened, torn between her sister's fury and the memory of Colt's hand cutting her ropes. She spoke at last, her voice quiet but steady. "We live because of him. Whatever blood stains his past, tonight he is not that man." Sani's eyes blazed. "You defend him even now." Nahila met her gaze without wavering. "Yes, because I see not only what he was, but what he chooses now." The friar rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "This mission is not a place of judgment. Stay the night, then move on. Your past walks too close behind you." With that, he left them, the door closing softly. The sisters lay together on cots in the small guest room. Sani turned her back to the others, rigid with anger. Taya curled close to Nahila, whispering, "Do you believe him?" Nahila stroked her sister's hair. "I believe what I see, and I see a man fighting to be more than his past." But when Taya slept, Nahila remained awake, her eyes drawn to Colt, who sat in the shadows cleaning his revolver. His face was carved in silence, his hands steady even as ghosts crowded close. At dawn, the bell tolled softly, calling the mission to prayer. The friar met them at the gate, his voice low but firm. "The desert does not forget. Men you wronged still breathe. They will find you." Colt nodded once. "They already have." Nahila glanced between them. "Who?" Colt's voice was quiet. "Soldiers who rode with me. Some turned outlaw, some turned hunters. They know my face, and they carry old grudges." Sani's eyes widened. "So we flee one pack of wolves only to be chased by another." Colt's jaw hardened. "This is the price of walking with me." Nahila stepped closer, her voice fierce. "Then it is the price we pay together." They rode out as the sun climbed, the mission shrinking behind them. Dust rose at their heels, but peace did not follow. For the first time, Nahila felt the weight of Colt's past not as rumor but as shadow, long, heavy, and unyielding. And somewhere out in that vast desert, those shadows were already moving toward them. The desert stretched wide and merciless, but the silence carried weight. Colt rode at the front, his posture stiff, eyes scanning the ridges. Nahila sensed the shift in him. He was too alert, his hand never far from the revolver. By midday, they reached a dry arroyo. The air shimmered with heat, and vultures circled lazily overhead. Colt raised his hand, halting them. "Tracks," he muttered. "Fresh ones, military boots." Sani's voice was sharp, edged with fear. "Soldiers?" Colt shook his head grimly. "Not anymore, and not the kind you'd want." Before Nahila could ask, the crack of a rifle split the air. The bullet slammed into the dust at Colt's horse's hooves, sending the animal rearing. Shouts echoed from the ridge. Figures rose from the rocks. Half a dozen men in ragged coats, their rifles gleaming. The leader stepped forward, his face weathered, his beard streaked with grey. His voice carried down the arroyo. "Maddox! Thought you could outrun us forever!" Colt's jaw tightened. "Rourke!" Nahila's breath caught. These were the shadows the friar had warned of. The men spread wide, rifles trained. Rourke spat into the dust. "You left us to die in the flames you lit. Took your coin and vanished while we bled, and now you ride with Apache girls. You've sunk low, Maddox." Colt's voice was steady, though Nahila saw the weight in his eyes. "I left because I was done killing for lies," Rourke sneered. "And yet here you stand, hiding behind them. Pathetic." Nahila's hand tightened on her knife. "He hides behind no one." Rourke's eyes shifted to her, narrowing. "And what's this? One of the burned come back to follow her butcher. You've got no shame, girl." Nahila lifted her chin. "I follow my choice, and my choice is to stand with him." The words rang across the arroyo, sharp as steel. Gunfire erupted. Colt pulled his revolver, firing back as the sisters scrambled for cover among the rocks. Bullets sparked against stone, dust rising in choking clouds. Nahila dragged Taya behind a boulder, shouting for Sani to move. Sani froze for a heartbeat, terror pinning her, until Nahila's voice snapped through the chaos. "Stand or die." Something broke in Sani's eyes. She grabbed a fallen rifle from the sand, fumbling with the weight. Her hands shook, but she aimed. Colt's shots rang steady, every bullet measured, buying seconds. Rourke advanced, his rifle barking, his men pressing hard. Nahila darted from cover, knife flashing. She slashed the leg of a man who tried to flank them, blood spraying. He cried out, tumbling into the dust. She wrenched his pistol free, firing clumsily but true at another who closed in too close. For the first time, she held a gun, and it felt like fire in her hand. Taya crouched low, her small hands clutching stones. When a rifle barrel appeared over the boulder, she swung hard, striking the man's wrist. He cursed, dropping his aim, and Sani's shaky shot rang out, grazing his shoulder. "Good, Sani," Colt shouted, reloading in the open, his movements fast despite the storm around him. Sani's breath came fast, but her fear was no longer freezing her. It was burning her forward. She fired again, teeth gritted, forcing another attacker to dive for cover. The fight dragged brutal minutes. Colt bled from a graze along his arm, his revolver nearly empty. Nahila moved like shadow and flame, her knife and stolen pistol striking with surprising precision. Even Sani, trembling but fierce, had joined the stand. Rourke advanced through it all, his eyes fixed on Colt. "This ends tonight, Maddox," he roared. Colt aimed, but his revolver clicked empty. Rourke grinned, lifting his rifle. Nahila saw it happen. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, slamming into Colt just as the rifle cracked. The bullet scorched the air, striking stone instead of flesh. Colt caught her, his eyes blazing. "You'll get yourself killed." Her gaze burned back at him. "Better beside you than bound again." The tide shifted. 2 of Rourke's men lay dead, the rest wounded or retreating. Dust swirled as they scrambled up the ridge, shouting curses. Only Rourke remained, bleeding but unbroken, his rifle still steady. He spat into the sand, glaring down at Colt and the sisters. "This isn't finished. You hear me, Maddox? I'll bleed you yet." Then he vanished into the rocks, his voice echoing until silence reclaimed the arroyo. When it was over, Nahila collapsed against the boulder, chest heaving. Sani dropped the rifle, her hands still shaking, her eyes wide with shock. Taya crawled into her sister's arms, trembling but alive. Colt holstered his revolver, his face grim. "He'll be back. Rourke doesn't quit." Nahila wiped blood from her knife, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Then let him come. We are not prey anymore." Her words hung in the air, fierce and certain. For the first time, all 3 sisters looked not only at Colt for strength, but at themselves. They had stood, they had fought, and together they had survived. The arroyo lay silent once more, broken only by the groans of the dying and the distant caw of vultures. Colt staggered from behind the boulder, blood seeping from a deep graze along his ribs. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight against the pain. Nahila sprang to his side, catching his arm as he faltered. "Sit," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I can still ride," Colt muttered, though his legs nearly buckled beneath him. "No," Nahila snapped. "You bleed more with every step. You will rest." For a moment, it seemed he might fight her command, but the weight of blood loss dragged him down, and with a grunt, he let her guide him to a flat stone where he sank heavily. Sani hovered nearby, her hands wringing. "He's finished," she whispered. "We can't carry him across the desert." Taya turned on her, eyes flashing. "Don't say that. He saved us." Sani's voice shook. "He will only slow us. If Rourke returns—" Nahila cut her off, her tone sharp as a blade. "If he returns, we face him together. Colt is not a burden. He is our shield, and now we must be his." Sani flinched under her sister's fire, but she said no more. Nahila tore strips from her skirt, pressing them firmly against Colt's wound. He hissed between his teeth, his eyes closing tight. "Hold still," she commanded. His voice was rough, weak but edged with humor. "You've got a soldier's bark." She pressed harder, earning a low grunt, better than a soldier's silence. When she was done, Colt leaned back, sweat streaking his face. "I won't be much good for a while. You'll have to lead." Nahila met his gaze, her own steady. "Then I lead." They set out again at dusk, moving slower now. Colt rode slumped in the saddle, his hand clutching the reins weakly, while Nahila guided his horse with hers. Taya kept close, watchful, while Sani rode behind, her face tight with unspoken fear. The desert stretched ahead, shadows long under the fading light. Coyotes yipped in the distance, the sound unsettling in its closeness. "We need shelter," Nahila said. Colt's voice was faint. "North, there's a canyon with caves. 2 days' ride," Sani gasped. 2 days? He won't survive 2 hours." Nahila shot her a glare that silenced further protest. "He will, because we will make him." That night, they camped beneath a low ridge. Nahila built the fire herself, her hands steady even as exhaustion tugged at her. She rationed their food, divided the water, and tended Colt's wound again, grinding herbs the friar had given them at the mission. Colt watched her through half-lidded eyes. "You've taken command like you were born to it." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled faintly as she worked. "I was not born to command. I was born to survive. And those who survive learn to lead." He managed a faint smile. "Then I chose the right person to follow." Her chest tightened at his words, but she said nothing, focusing instead on binding the wound. The days that followed tested them all. The heat was merciless, the nights bitter cold. Colt grew weaker, his strength draining, his once steady hands trembling as he tried to reload his revolver. Nahila stepped into the role without hesitation. She scouted the trails, chose when to rest, and kept her sisters moving when their legs threatened to give out. She hunted small game, taught Taya to set snares, and even pressed a rifle into Sani's reluctant hands. "You will not freeze again," Nahila told her firmly. "Fear does not stop your hand, it only makes it shake. Aim and fire." Sani's first shots went wide, but under Nahila's relentless gaze, they grew truer. For the first time, respect flickered in her eyes when she looked at her elder sister. One evening, as they camped at the mouth of a canyon, Colt tried to rise. Nahila stopped him with a hand to his chest. "You are not ready," she said. He shook his head stubbornly. "You can't carry this alone." Her eyes burned. "I already do, and I will until you can stand." For a moment, silence stretched. Then Colt's lips curved faintly. "You sound like a commander." Nahila's voice softened. "No, I sound like a sister." That night, when the fire burned low, Nahila sat watch with her knife across her knees. Taya curled against her, Sani asleep at her side. Colt stirred faintly, his eyes opening to the glow of the flames. "You should rest," he murmured. Nahila shook her head. "If I rest, who watches?" His gaze lingered on her, heavy with unspoken gratitude. "I never asked for this." She looked at him steadily. "Nor did we. Yet here we are. You saved us once. Now, we save you." The fire crackled between them, sparks rising like stars into the night. And in that silence, Nahila understood. She was no longer just a survivor. She was the one who carried them forward. Sisters, Cowboy, all of them bound together by blood and fire. The canyon night was cold, the fire burning low, throwing long shadows against the stone walls. Colt sat propped against a boulder, his face pale under the bandages Nahila had changed earlier. His revolver lay beside him, untouched, his strength too far gone to lift it. Nahila sat across from him, her sisters asleep between them. Sani's breath came shallow and uneasy. Taya curled tightly against her side. The silence was heavy, and Nahila knew Colt was awake by the faint glimmer in his eyes, fixed on the flames. "You should rest," she whispered. He gave a dry chuckle that turned into a cough. "Rest brings dreams. I've had enough of those." Nahila studied him. "Dreams of what?" Colt's gaze dropped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came rough, stripped bare, of fire, of screams, of villages turned to ash. Her stomach tightened. She remembered the friar's words at the mission, the accusations, the hints. Now she pressed, her voice steady. "Tell me." He drew a ragged breath. "I was young when I took the uniform. They told us we rode for justice, for peace, that we'd bring order to Wildland. I believed it." His eyes flickered to hers, heavy with shame. "I believed it until I saw what we did." Nahila's hand clenched on her knee. "We rode into villages at dawn," Colt continued, voice low. "Men cut down before they could lift tools. Women dragged screaming. Children, God help me, children running through smoke while we called it victory. And I—" His throat closed. "I pulled the trigger. I followed orders." Nahila's chest ached. She could almost smell the smoke, hear the cries in her own memories. "I left when I couldn't stand it anymore," Colt said. "But by then, it was too late. Too much blood on my hands. Too many ghosts." He gestured weakly at the canyon around them. "I've been running from them ever since." Silence stretched. The fire popped, sparks rising. Nahila's breath came tight, her hand trembling on her knife. "You killed my people," she whispered. Colt didn't flinch. "Maybe. I don't know which villages fell under my hand, but I know they burned. I know families were broken. And if it was yours," his voice cracked, "then I carry that weight too." Her jaw tightened, fury and grief colliding. Part of her wanted to rise, to drive her blade into the man who admitted such things. But another part saw the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes held no defense. He wasn't excusing himself. He was confessing. "You should hate me," Colt said quietly. "I should," Nahila whispered. Her hand hovered over the knife. His chest rose and fell, steady, waiting, not resisting, not pleading. He was ready for her judgment. The silence pressed, like the desert heat. Then Nahila let out a slow breath and pulled her hand away from the blade. "You are not the man who burned those villages," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "That man is dead. What stands before me now is someone else, someone who saved us." Colt's eyes widened slightly, pain and disbelief mingling. "After all I told you, You still stand with me. She met his gaze, her own steady. I stand with the man you choose to be now, not the one you were. From her blanket, Sani stirred. Her voice was raw, bitter. How can you forgive him so easily? Do you forget the graves? Nahila turned to her sister, her voice fierce. I forget nothing, but hatred does not feed us. Hatred does not keep us alive. We walk with him because he stands when others fall. That is enough. Sani's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she said no more. Taya, half asleep, murmured, he is ours. Like you said, Nahila, ours. Then she drifted back into slumber. The night grew quiet again. Colt leaned back, his strength waning, but his eyes never left Nahila. You speak like a leader, he murmured. Her lips curved faintly. I speak like a sister who has no choice but to lead. He managed a weak smile. Then I'll follow. The fire dimmed, leaving only embers. Nahila sat awake long into the night, her knife across her knees, her heart torn, but resolute. Colt's past was blood and ashes, but she had chosen to see the man before her, not the ghost behind him. The desert would test that choice soon enough. The dawn broke red, painting the canyon walls with the color of blood. Nahila stood at the mouth of the camp, knife in hand, her eyes scanning the horizon. The desert was too quiet, no wind, no cry of coyote, no whisper of wings. Silence that thick was never natural. Colt stirred behind her, groaning as he pushed himself upright against the rock. His face was pale, but his eyes sharp despite the weakness in his body. They're coming, he said. Nahila glanced at him. You feel it? I know it, Colt muttered. Rourke doesn't leave a hunt unfinished. Last time he tested us. This time he'll bring numbers. Sani stepped forward, fear tightening her face. Then we must run before they find us. Nahila shook her head. We've run enough. The desert will swallow us if we keep fleeing. We make our stand where the ground favors us. Colt gave a grim nod. She's right. Choose the place well, and numbers won't matter. They broke camp quickly. Nahila led them into the deeper canyons, following trails only half marked by stone and shadow. Taya clung close to her saddle, eyes wide, while Sani muttered prayers under her breath. By midday, they reached a gorge where the cliffs narrowed into a funnel of jagged rock. Colt dismounted slowly, wincing, his hand pressed against his ribs. He pointed to the ridge above. That's where we hold them. High ground. Narrow pass. They'll choke themselves trying to reach us. Nahila studied the rocks, nodding. It will do. They worked quickly. Nahila gathered loose stones to hurl from the ridge. Taya helped stack brush at the canyon's mouth, ready to be lit if needed. Colt showed Sani how to steady a rifle, his voice calm even as sweat beaded on his brow. You aim low, he told her. Hit the horse, not the rider. Drop the beast. You stop 2 men at once. Sani's hands shook, but she nodded, swallowing hard. The sun dipped low when the first dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Riders, many more than before, 15, maybe 20, their rifles glinting in the dying light. At their front rode Rourke, his scarred face twisted in grim triumph, his voice carried into the gorge. Maddox, you think you can hide behind rocks forever? Tonight I finish you, and take what you guard. His eyes slid to Nahila and her sisters. Nahila's jaw tightened. She raised her knife, her voice ringing out clear. We are not yours to take, Rourke sneered. You'll be mine soon enough. Colt's revolver cracked once, the bullet sparking against the rock near Rourke's horse. His voice was steady, though his hand trembled. Step closer, and you'll choke on your own words. The battle broke like a storm. Gunfire thundered in the canyon, bullets sparking off stone. Nahila darted from cover, hurling rocks down onto the riders below. One horse screamed, rearing, throwing its rider into the dust. Sani fired the rifle, the shot wild but close enough to scatter a pair of men pressing forward. Colt's revolver barked again and again, each shot measured, every bullet buying precious moments. Taya lit the brush pile with shaking hands. Flames roared to life, smoke billowing across the canyon mouth, choking the rider's charge. Rourke bellowed orders, his men pushing through the fire and chaos. One climbed the ridge, scrambling toward Nahila. She met him head-on, knife flashing, slashing across his arm. He cried out, tumbling back down into the smoke, but numbers pressed harder. Colt sagged against the rock, blood seeping through his bandage as he fired his last rounds. I'm empty, he rasped. Nahila rushed to him, forcing the pistol from his hand and pressing it into her own. Then I fight for both of us. He caught her wrist, his eyes fierce. Don't throw yourself away. Her voice burned. "I am not throwing, I am standing." Their eyes locked, a vow unspoken, before she tore free and turned back to the fray. Rourke pushed through the smoke, his face blackened with soot, his rifle raised. "End of the trail, Maddox!" he roared. Nahila stepped between them, pistol in one hand, knife in the other. "If you want him, you go through me." Rourke sneered. "Then so be it." The canyon roared with fresh gunfire, the fight surging to its breaking point. The sisters fought with desperate ferocity, Colt slumped but still shouting orders, and Nahila stood at the heart of it, leader, protector, flame. As the sun died and the desert night closed in, the stage was set. The final reckoning was no longer a shadow. It was here. The canyon burned with smoke and gunfire, the air so thick with powder it seared the lungs. Nahila crouched low behind a jagged rock. Colt slumped a few paces behind her, his breathing ragged. Rourke's men pressed hard, their shouts echoing off the stone walls. "Push them back!" Rourke roared, his rifle raised, his scarred face lit by firelight. His voice carried a certainty. He believed the fight already won. Nahila's eyes narrowed. Not yet. She rose, pistol in hand, and fired into the smoke. A rider toppled, his horse screaming as it crashed into another man. Chaos rippled through the pack, but still they came, step by step, a tide of steel and fury. Sani crouched nearby, the rifle shaking in her hands. "I can't, Nahila. I can't hit them." "Yes, you can," Nahila snapped, eyes blazing. "Aim low. Trust your hands." Taya gripped Sani's arm, her small voice fierce. "Sister, please, we need you." Sani's breath hitched, but she pressed the rifle to her shoulder. She fired. The shot rang true, striking the leg of a horse and sending both beast and rider tumbling. Sani's eyes widened in shock, but also in something new. Confidence. Nahila allowed the faintest nod. Again, Rourke climbed higher on the ridge, his coat flaring like a banner. He sneered down at Colt. "You look small now, Maddox. Smaller than when you left us burning." Colt tried to raise his revolver, but his hand shook too violently. The gun clattered against the stone. Nahila stepped forward, knife flashing in her other hand. "You want him? Then you face me." Rourke laughed, harsh and cruel. "You think you're steel, girl? You're nothing but ash waiting for wind." Her eyes burned. "Then I'll choke you with it." The fight surged again. Nahila darted through the smoke, slashing at one man who broke through the brushfire. He went down hard, screaming as blood darkened the sand. Taya hurled stones from the ridge, striking helmets and hands, forcing rifles down at the worst moments. Sani steadied, her fear turning into sharp determination. Shot after shot cracked from her rifle, each closer, each louder, until even the men below began to falter. "You see?" Nahila shouted between blows. "Together, we are stronger than them." Her words carried like a battle cry, echoing off the canyon walls. But Rourke pushed closer. He shoved through his men, his rifle smoking, his boots crunching over stone. His eyes locked on Colt, who lay pale against the rock. "This ends with your blood, Maddox," he growled. Nahila stepped between them once more, her stance wide, her pistol aimed steady despite the tremor in her arm. "You'll have to kill me first," Rourke sneered. "Gladly." He fired. The bullet tore through the edge of her sleeve, grazing her arm. Pain seared, but she didn't fall. She fired back. The shot grazed his cheek, drawing blood. His face twisted in rage. The battle spiraled into chaos. Men scrambled to retreat from the fire. Others pressed forward in blind fury. The canyon rang with screams, smoke and steel. Colt forced himself upright, his face white with pain. He shouted hoarsely, "Nahila, fall back!" But she didn't move. She stood in the open, blade in one hand, pistol in the other, her sisters flanking her. Together, they formed a line, thin, trembling, but unbroken. For the first time, Rourke hesitated. His men faltered, staring at the three girls standing shoulder to shoulder with fire in their eyes. "Look at you," Rourke spat. "Three children hiding behind a dying man. You think this is victory?" Nahila's voice cut sharp. "No, this is survival, and survival is stronger than greed." The sisters shouted together, fierce and wild, and charged. Sani fired point blank, her shot blasting a man off his feet. Taya hurled herself at another, clawing, biting, forcing him off balance until Nahila's knife found his throat. Blood sprayed, hot against the stone. They fought not like trained soldiers, but like cornered wolves, desperate, untamed, and merciless. Rourke roared, pushing forward through the carnage. He swung the butt of his rifle, slamming it into Nahila's shoulder, sending her crashing to the dirt. Pain flared white, but she rolled, knife slashing, tearing a gash across his leg. He howled, staggering. Colt lurched forward, collapsing against the rock but raising his revolver one last time. His voice was raw. "Rourke!" The outlaw turned just as Colt fired. The bullet ripped into his side and spinning him. He fell to his knees, blood soaking his coat. But still he snarled, crawling toward them like a beast that refused to die. The remaining men broke. Some fled into the smoke. Others dragged their wounded back, leaving Rourke kneeling in the dirt, fury and blood dripping from his mouth. Nahila rose, her chest heaving, her knife raised high. She stood over him, her shadow stretching across his broken form. "This ends now," she whispered. Her sisters flanked her, Sani gripping the rifle with newfound steadiness, Taya clutching a bloodied stone. Colt watched from behind, his breath shallow, his eyes heavy but proud. The canyon was silent, but for Rourke's labored breathing. The final blow was seconds away. The reckoning had come. Rourke knelt in the dust, blood soaking through his coat, his breath ragged and wet. His eyes, though dimmed by pain, still burned with hatred. He spat crimson into the sand and growled, "You think this is victory? You think the desert forgives?" Nahila stood over him, her knife gleaming in the firelight. Her sisters flanked her, Sani steady now, rifle pressed tight against her shoulder, Taya clutching her stone like a warrior born. Behind them, Colt leaned heavily against the rock, revolver trembling in his hand, his face pale but his eyes locked on the man who had haunted him for years. "This ends tonight," Nahila said. Rourke laughed, bitter and hollow. "You don't have the steel, girl. You're all bark, just like Maddox, hiding behind children." Her jaw tightened. For a heartbeat she felt the weight of the knife, the heat of the fire, the pulse of her sisters beside her. She had killed before in defense, but this was judgment. Colt's voice broke the silence, hoarse but commanding. "He won't stop, unless someone makes him." Nahila's hand trembled. She looked back at Colt, at the man who had confessed his sins, who now sat bloodied and broken, but unyielding. His eyes told her the truth. If she spared Rourke, he would rise again, gather men again, and the hunt would never end. Sani's voice wavered. "Nahila, we don't have to do this," Taya whispered, fierce. "Yes, we do. For us." Nahila closed her eyes. She saw fire. She saw the ropes that once bound her wrists, the smoke of villages burned, the faces of her sisters when the bandits first closed in. And she saw Colt, standing between them and death time and time again, despite the ghosts that clung to him. Her eyes opened. The tremble left her hand. She drove the knife down. Rourke's eyes widened as steel bit deep into his chest. He gasped once, a sound half snarl, half choke, then sagged forward into the dirt. Blood spread beneath him, dark against the sand. The canyon was silent. The fire crackled. The echoes of battle faded into nothing but the sound of breathing, theirs alive. Nahila stood over the body, chest heaving, the knife slick with crimson. Her sisters stared, wide-eyed. Sani's lips parted in shock. Taya's eyes glistened with both fear and pride. Colt exhaled slowly, a long, shuddering breath. "It's done." Nahila knelt, wiping the blade clean on Rourke's coat. She whispered, not to him but to the desert, "Let his ghost end here." Sani lowered the rifle, her hands still trembling. You killed him." Nahila looked at her, steady. "No, we ended him. All of us. Together." Taya clutched Nahila's hand, her small voice fierce. "We are not prey anymore." For the first time, Sani didn't argue. She only nodded, tears streaking her dust-stained face. Colt tried to rise, but his legs buckled. Nahila rushed to his side, catching him. His skin was clammy, his breath shallow. "You shouldn't move," she said. He managed a faint, wry smile. "You're giving orders again." "You'd be dead without them," she shot back, her voice softer than her words. His gaze lingered on her, heavy with something unspoken. "You saved more than just yourselves tonight. You saved me, too." Her chest tightened. "Then live. That is how you pay us back." They buried Rourke at dawn. No prayers, no markers, just sand and stone. The desert claimed him as it had claimed so many. The sisters stood silent, their faces hard, while Colt leaned against Nahila for support. When the last stone was placed, Nahila spoke quietly. "Let him vanish into the dust. We carry no chains from him anymore." Taya whispered, "Only each other." Sani added softly. And him, her eyes flicking to Colt. For once, her tone carried no bitterness. As the sun rose higher, the desert stretched endless before them, no longer a prison but a road. Their wounds ached, their strength was frayed, but they stood together at the canyon's edge, survivors bound not by blood alone but by choice. Nahila turned to her sisters. We ride, not as prey, not as fugitives, as our own. Colt's voice, rough but steady, joined hers. And no one takes that from you again. The sisters mounted their horses. Colt hauled into the saddle with Nahila's help. For a moment, they lingered, gazing back at the canyon where smoke still clung to the stones. Then they turned forward, into the wide horizon. The desert no longer seemed endless. It seemed theirs, and together they rode. 2 days had passed since the blood dried in the canyon, and the wind carried only silence now. The desert was quiet, vast and golden, with the sun rising behind them and a long road still ahead. Nahila rode at the front, her shoulders wrapped in Colt's old coat, still torn, still stained, but warm. Her sisters rode just behind, their eyes alert, but no longer afraid. Colt, though weakened, sat tall in the saddle beside her, one arm bound to his chest, the other resting loosely near his revolver. They had no destination, and yet for the first time, they didn't need one. At dusk, they came across an old ranch house, abandoned but standing. The roof sagged, the well was dry, and tumbleweeds had claimed most of the fence line, but the structure held, stubborn like the people who once lived there. Taya jumped down first. It's not much, but it's shelter. Sani ran her hand across the sun-bleached doorframe. We can fix it. Colt smiled weakly. Sounds like you're planning to stay a while. Nahila glanced at him. Maybe, or maybe we're just tired of running. He didn't argue. Instead, he dismounted slowly, every movement laced with pain. Then let's make this place ours, even just for tonight. That evening, they lit a fire in the crumbling hearth. Sani boiled water in a dented pot, using dried herbs she'd gathered along the way. Taya swept the floor with a broken broom, humming softly. Nahila patched Colt's wounds again, her fingers steady now, her touch gentler than before. He watched her in the firelight. You've changed. She didn't look up. We all have. A beat passed. Do you think you'll forgive me? Nahila paused. Then she looked him in the eye. I already did. The moment you stood in front of us and didn't run. He nodded slowly, his throat tight. Later, the sisters curled up together near the fire, wrapped in shared blankets. Nahila sat by the window, staring out into the dark. Colt limped over and sat beside her in silence. The stars stretched above them, endless and bright. Do you think they're watching? He asked quietly. Who? The ones we lost. Nahila tilted her head. Maybe, but I don't think they want us to look back. He smiled faintly. Then I won't. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was no weight between them. Only breath, only presence. The next morning, they began working, not out of obligation, but instinct. The barn was half collapsed, so Sani and Taya started clearing the debris. Nahila found an old shovel and began digging a trench to redirect water runoff. Colt hammered loose boards back in place with one good hand. They weren't building a fortress, they were building a pause. And in that pause, something like healing began. One afternoon, a stranger approached the house, an old man with a burrow and a sack of dried beans. He raised a hand in peace. Didn't expect to see life here again, he said, eyeing the girls warily. Nahila stepped forward, calm and proud. We're not looking for trouble. Didn't say you were, the man replied. Just good to see the place breathing again. He left the beans and returned the next week with tools, a barter. Soon, others came. Travelers, widows, outcasts. They asked no questions. They offered small things, stories, eggs, blankets. The house became a place of in-between, a halfway home for people not yet whole. One evening, Taya came running. A horse! In the distance! Colt grabbed his rifle out of habit, but Nahila stopped him with a hand. And wait, it was a woman, Apache, alone, dust-covered and hollow-eyed. Nahila stepped out to meet her. No threats, no fear, only recognition. The woman whispered, They took everything from me. Nahila nodded. Then we'll give you something back. She didn't mean food or shelter. She meant breath, safety, dignity, and the woman stayed. Over time, the ranch grew not in size but in soul. No one claimed to own it. No flags flew, but the fire never died, and the doors never locked. One day, Colt asked, "What do we call this place?" Nahila thought for a long moment, then said, "Ashfall." Colt blinked. "Sounds like ruin," she smiled. "Sounds like rebirth." Months later, under a twilight sky, Colt sat beside her again, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned her head on his chest. "Do you still think you're a broken man?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "No, I think I was waiting to meet someone unbroken enough to remind me." She chuckled. "I'm not unbroken, but you bend toward the light." Nahila closed her eyes. For once, there were no shadows chasing her. Just the sound of fire, the scent of earth, the laughter of sisters behind her, and the steady rhythm of a man's heart beside her. If this story moved you, consider joining our journey. Subscribe to the channel and discover more stories of redemption, strength, and wild, untamed hope.